And welcome to day 3 of the Healthcare and Life Sciences track. Hard to believe all good things actually come to an end. So did you guys enjoy the Adam Grant presentation this morning? I'm actually leading Outliers, so it was very, very relevant for me. So he's just an awesome speaker, someone I want to be like someday. So this morning, again, we have the second of our 2 payer-focused presentations from Premera Blue Cross. We have a very, very interesting relationship with Premera Blue Cross in complete transparency. While Premera Blue Cross is a prized customer of Tableau, Tableau is also a customer of Premera Blue Cross. So to present this pretty interesting framework, I'm going to test my short-term memory here around data custody, data latency, and data language. I got that right. Yeah. And how they deploy visual analytics to drive operational efficiency across the organization is the very dapper Naomi Raymond and Eric Valpy from Premera Blue Cross, who will take you through that journey and that odyssey. So with that brief introduction, please take it away.
Ooh, good morning. Can everybody hear me? Great. Good morning, everybody. I guess I got to walk around and say hello to everyone, and thank you, Andy, for introducing us. We're really excited to be here. I hope everybody had a great time last night. Everybody, woo! Y'all look great. Everybody's like, no, not enough coffee yet this morning. Did you get your beignets at least, right? As Andy mentioned, today we're going to be talking about taking data to the edge and how Premera Blue Cross has outlined visual analytics to be able to take us there, and what that journey looked like over the last 5 to 6 years on how we defined, communicated, and speak the language of data together. I am Naomi Raymond, work for Premera Blue Cross. Oh, we didn't test the clicker, Eric. Technical difficulties. You know what? It's like weddings. Anything that's really good has to have a flaw. We can use the arrows too. It's okay.
This is, I don't need the mouse, yeah.
Oh, thank you. And hey, look, it works. So like I said, I'm Naomi Raymond. I'm a lead healthcare data consultant at Premera Blue Cross. And
Hi, I'm Eric Valpy. I'm an actuary by day and a carpenter by night, I guess.
So who is Premera? Well, we are a Blue Cross Blue Shield licensee. We operate in Washington, the state, for those on the East Coast, and Alaska. As well as healthcare, we offer a myriad of other products. We cover around 2.1 million lives. We're really fortunate, being in the Pacific Northwest, to have 7 of the top 11 Fortune 500 companies.
And of course, our favorite customer, Tableau.
Hi, Lindsay. Woo! So today we're going to introduce to you guys our themes, as you've kind of heard so far.
All right, so this works as our legend. So for all the viz that we're trying to push into you, remember these icons. These are going to show up throughout the presentation. These describe the 3 major axes or trade-off paradigms that we want to really focus on and have you all kind of think about in your own spaces. Where is it that my org is on this trade-off axis? And where is it that I'd like it to be?
Boy, Eric, that's really data geeky there. A legend in our presentation. So data latency, what exactly does that mean for us in this presentation? Well, we're going to define that as the time between when the event happens and when we see it represented in our data. As you can see, we're introducing to you this concept of a trade-off. And I'm sure a lot of you guys experience that with the data latency, the trade-off between immediacy and accuracy.
For example, this morning I was shaving and I was in a rush and I cut my face and I ended up at Starbucks asking for like a little like medical kit so I could like get that thing dressed up. You rush too much, you start to mess up.
Eric, I took my time on my eyelashes, so they look pretty on fleek.
Data custody is that idea of who is responsible for the data, who owns it, and who defines what calculating any kind of defined KPI means and what it ought to mean. And then how do you take responsibility when something doesn't represent the truth? Or who takes responsibility? We see this as a natural trade-off between those data engineers that can guarantee you a certain kind of data resiliency, and then the subject matter experts that can really identify when the data doesn't really represent reality.
So data language is our third trade-off that we're going to introduce, and the definition for that is really how do we ensure that the data we communicate is interpreted correctly? You know, that sometimes can be the trade-off between the data exploration and the storytelling that we do.
All right, so my Tableau story starts really with the launch of the Affordable Care Act. We'll take you back in time in 2013. You might remember this sudden, terrifying moment when, you know, here we are in October and nobody can get on the healthcare.gov website. Now, for our purpose, we had a market in Alaska, which was on the federal site, but Washington had run its own website that was pretty functional. And so off the bat, we were seeing enrollments, but the big question was, and the big curiosity was, who was going to enroll? And what were we going to be able to know about our customers going into that first plan year? This is a latency problem because where I come from, I'm an actuary, and we're usually used to pricing in like, you know, spring for the next plan year, starting in the following January. We're used to really long time leads. We're used to wanting to get lots of data run out before we say anything at all about what happened in the period. But this is a different kind of a challenge. This is like, what happened right now? What happened yesterday? So for me to go exploring, I would have to get digging into some data dictionaries from some data sets I was not familiar with. I was used to the reporting layer, which was lagged by several days, and went through all the validations and checks. But in this case, I'm trying to learn from other people's code and get their SQL and to try to understand it. It totally was one of those custody problems where somebody else understood and knew those data sets, but they were not accustomed to reporting it in any manner that I was looking for.
So my journey really starts about the same exact time as the ACA enrollment, where Premera had actually re-entered the Medicare Advantage market. I remember at the time, I was actually new to healthcare and newer to Premera, and I remember they were introducing why Premera would be entering the Medicare Advantage market and why it was so important for our business. I was really excited when I was getting ready for this presentation to have found this old YouTube advertisement screenshot that I was able to put in here, and it reminded me about the zero premium plan. I previously come from a financial industry, and so for me, I was like, how do you have a product of zero premium? I'll say now, over 5 years later, I know way too much about Medicare Advantage. I think I'm set for when I turn 65. So like Eric had said, you know, the Medicare Advantage segment owners and our company in general were really excited about this. We also had enrollment questions, and we didn't want to wait for the latency of, you know, after the members had become effective to see what was going on. Well, you know, the business was wanting to see, you know, what's the average age of the people who are enrolling, and, you know, what method are they using? How are they coming to us? And, you know, what method are they using to actually send in their application? This really shows the sign of data immediacy and where they were at that time. Also, we had a question about data custody. Where are we going to get that information? Who should own it? Who should be reporting on this information? Whoa, that's a pie chart. I know half of you at least are probably guilty of this at some point or other in your time as a developer or visual analytics. But, you know, at the time, this was the tool that was available. I know many of you who've, you know, seasoned professionals, you know, that was a tool you had. And it offered the great convenience of immediacy, but, you know, it had a very limited distribution model. At the time, the analyst who was responsible for this, you know, they made the best with what they had without having visual analytics best practices like all the young kids coming out of college had already taken. And really tried to deliver to the business what they needed. Of course, as you know, this is a manual process of acquiring the data and delivering it. It took her about a day a week to be able to provide insights. So at the time, you know, the most immediate insights on enrollment were, you know, only once a week and after a whole entire day of labor. And it really didn't provide for much interaction or additional drill down or question asking. So this really presented a challenge for us at Premera. You know, what do we do with this? We had all this desire of people who wanted to have information. So we really took that challenge and said, you know what, let's deliver data to those who need it.
Let's do it.
Data for the people. I love those.
All right, so we want to introduce the idea of a trade-off frontier. You may remember Economics 101, where you've got your scatter plot, and you've got things that are performing in 2 different dimensions, and you want to kind of figure out what's that efficiency frontier. We don't necessarily know which is the best, but here the idea is that we have several different ways that we can go about acquiring the data. One is we can look to the business intelligence folks, and we can go through the rubric and the rigor of specifying exactly what we need and developing a system that could turn into a reporting system that we can self-serve from.
Yeah, Eric, as an analyst, I always found that kind of difficult because I always want to analyze the data before I ask for the data. So I could never tell them what I wanted because I didn't get a chance to look at it yet.
It's such a catch-22.
It totally is.
Now, we also had an in-house informatics department that was more of like customer-focused. You put in a request, they have their experts go through and crunch the data joins correctly and give you a report, but it's still required this lead time. You had to get into their queue, and of course you had to know what you were asking for. Alternatively, you could try to self-serve, and maybe you had permissions on a data set, you could get access to this or that, but you're kind of playing a little bit of a game here where I think I know what that field means, and if I add it up, then I'm going to be representing the right number of dollars, right?
Self-validating, too, with all those calculations in that spreadsheet delivery, right?
On the custody trade-off, we're looking at this idea of who is ultimately going to be responsible if the data doesn't represent what we mean for it to. So we have different groups that might take that responsibility. One is you can think about the information or the IT folks being the ones that are these ultimate custodians and the ones who can put that stamp on and say yes. This is great when you end up with really formalized and documented processes, but of course it takes a long time to get those. And you won't necessarily know if there's mistakes in the data unless you have your subject matter experts also kind of checking. I'll give you one example is that we had a hospital system that was reporting birth weights. And we were like, whoa, look at all these premature kids that these guys are delivering. And oh my God, they're doing it at really low cost. We need to think about sending maternity there. No, it was just that somebody didn't know the conversion of grams to kilograms, and we were off by a decimal place in the data that we were collecting. Whoops. So alternatively, you'll have the different departments in the organization build their own data marts.
Hey, don't take my data mart from me, Eric. Don't.
And this is a thing of contention, right? Like if you own your data mart, you can at least control what's coming into it, but it might be that you're an analytical team who doesn't really have the data engineering expertise to manage when, let's say you're trying to upgrade to the next version of some grouper system that you bought or something.
Well, and I also find as somebody who loves her data mart that if I am a business analyst on the business side and not on the IT side, sometimes I don't even have access to the technology that I need to be able to support my data mart. So I always have to find a way around.
And then, of course, then it falls to the individual analyst. And here, you're relying on the data sets that you have been given, and you're trying to kind of just cobble or scrub together what it is you can. That does allow for some certain kind of quickness, and you can get the right data pieces in front of the folks who are those experts. But it's definitely this trade-off of you could have big holes in your data, or you could be missing that immediacy problem or be in a high latency situation. When it comes to the data language, we're talking about different reporting methods. How do we get information out to the folks? So one would be to go the heavy-duty route, and where you conscript folks or maybe work with a vendor to develop a specialty application for your division where it allows something that works just for the customer service folks, where while we're on the call, we're getting exactly the information we need about the member who's calling, and that we can have a live conversation with them that gives us the pertinent information that we need. Or on the flip side, in the sales channels, we've got our own systems that are in place that are supposed to collect information. I guess Naomi can speak to this a lot better than me. And then alternatively, using a spreadsheet to report out is maybe one of the most common and easy ways to do this. You can put just about anything in a spreadsheet, and if you're sufficiently advanced, you can add the visual analytics to that as well. But spreadsheets can become really onerous. I've seen bazillions of tabs show up, and those things can be really unwieldy. And how do you hand one of those off to the next person to maintain? Oh,
or
my
if the
goodness.
owner ends up leaving, wins the lottery.
No kidding.
Like that person in South Carolina, $1.6 billion.
So a lot of mess potential in those spreadsheet solutions. But they do allow access to tons of exploration if you want to give your customers that ability. And of course, alternatively, you can just work out what the story is going to be, build that presentation, and you can tell exactly the data story that you want. But then what happens when you want to update to the next month? You're doing a lot of manual work.
You know what, Eric? I just heard at Devs on Stage that you can kick your Tableau dashboard out into PowerPoint these days.
The future is bright.
Yes, it is. Doesn't sound like a trade-off there. So that really came, what all was happening at this moment was we had this confluence. As you hear our journey of kind of where Eric was and where I was, at the time we also had the opportunity that Premera had brought in Tableau Server.
Yeah, for me, I happened to be assigned to a research and development team, and that meant I had a lot of open bandwidth to kind of choose my own projects and chase my own curiosities. So that gave me some room when the ACA exchange enrollment was launching to have the time to dedicate to go spelunking, so to speak. Because so many other people were interested in the same question, that means that my emails were getting responded and I was actually able to make some of this progress. And of course, having Tableau Server as an option for enterprise delivery distribution made that high potential. So it was exciting to try to tackle that.
Hey, Eric, we met too.
That's true. This is about when we met.
Yeah, it's really about when we met.
Technically, we swam in the same organization when we were kids.
My swim team would beat his swim team every year.
That's true. Okay, so I want you to get familiar with this dashboard. This is my first attempt at something wide. Here we are, the first week of open enrollment. And a few things that kind of probably stand out. You'll notice that Alaska enrollments are awesome. Not, right? We have exactly one application that meant, and that's probably like a dummy data point. Like we just tested the system, so there's like a fake person. That's my guess. I don't really know.
Did it feel like boiling water that you're watching, right?
Now, Oregon launched their own insurance exchange also, but unlike Washington, they don't know they're at, what's that word? Proverbial elbow? Anyway, the elbow thing. Anyway, the idea here is in the first week, look at all those millennials that have signed up for health insurance. Wow, this is going to be awesome. Obamacare is, everyone's here. Oh no, as soon as we get to November, we realize that those millennials, they're buying insurance in normal proportions as we might have expected. It's those pre-boomer or pre-Medicare age folks that are the huge purchasers. But we've solved the latency problem, and now we have reporting within a day of any enrollment. It's showing up in our dashboard, and we're getting lots of visibility. So folks are showing this off in their meetings, and other people are asking for permissions on the dashboard, and it's really catching on quite a lot of wildfires. We're also socializing data language ideas. For instance, this little area chart in the bottom left I want to draw your attention to. We're simultaneously showing you number of contracts sold in the y-axis. We're using the x-axis as the width of the number of members in a contract or family members. And so area becomes the communication of how many members are buying each thing. So visually, you're kind of using your pre-attentive ideas here that area represents membership. So enrollments are looking great through December. And then imagine if anybody was really paying attention knows what happens next. And here I'm going to just set you up here. The White House used to be a total mess when it comes to their communications department. Anybody remember this guy? Yeah, that's right. That's right, Pajama Boy. This was the big snafu in the day. Anyway. So enrollments were strong, but then came in the biggest sad news of my life, and that was you are not allowed to distribute this dashboard anymore. You are reporting on someone else's area, and they're responsible for the reporting, and we don't want to show two different numbers, whatever those discrepancies might be. And so I was given the shutdown notice, and it was gutting. It was so sad. I was proud, and then I was humiliated. And
You know, Eric, I remember with the data custody icon here that I actually was a consumer of your dashboard when it was live. And at the time, I actually was doing channel analytics of the migration pattern of our grandfathered and grandmothered individual members over to the exchange and or metallic off exchange. And so early on, I had kind of used it as a check and balance so that as my story's going out and your story's going out, to a lot of the same audience, that I could actually speak to some of the differences and why.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. Too
But
bad you got shut down.
what
though.
would we have learned if the dashboard had persisted in the way that we had reported things here? I want to draw your attention to a corner of the dashboard here. Hopefully the resolution's high enough for you to notice that we've got only 13% of metallic purchases are from the gold plans, and the gold plans were the very rich benefits where you would expect that 80% of costs were covered by the plan in a typical population. And you'll see also in that kind of fuchsia color that it's less than a third of enrollments are coming from outside of the exchange. So just to set up the pieces of this dashboard and what that means. All right, so that's kind of like the baseline I want to establish. So we talked about Oregon being kind of a different animal. What happens when we click on Oregon? Those numbers are really different. Like, look at that gold enrollment. It's massive. And look at that outside of the exchange enrollment. Well, that's also massive. Now, that's telling a very different story from what the rest of our exchange enrollment looks like. And if we're thinking about this, what does that mean is going to happen in Oregon to our product? We're selling only really, really rich benefits. Who's buying really rich benefits?
Those who need
Sick
it.
people buy rich benefits. Guess how much money we made in Oregon that year? We did not make money in Oregon that year. We lost money in Oregon year. And of course, there's nothing that this dashboard could have done really to keep us from losing money in Oregon that year. But we went on to sell in Oregon the next year and lose money, and the year after that.
So that brings me over to the Medicare Advantage. So I had originally introduced to you the first enrollment year and the analyst struggle that they had at the time with the tools that were made available to them and with the new information that was coming at them, and the dichotomy of the information that our sales professionals and leadership management needed to find out. So I was in a position at the time where I was newer to Premera, and the team that I was hired for had already implemented Tableau. I also quickly jumped the coattails of the team who had stood up the Tableau Server, because I identified that as a distribution vehicle that was really going to make all this come to fruition. So that next year's open enrollment, I actually had connected with the salesperson, analyst who had supported Medicare Advantage that first year, and sat down with them and said, you know what, let's see what we can do in Tableau with that information. What was really beautiful about this was that the analyst already had understood the information, knew the source that it was coming from. She'd been through a cycle of validating it and the challenges. She's already identified some of the key metrics that the business needed. And so it was really exciting to be able to take that and show her how we can automate that data through Tableau extracts, so that no longer did she have to spend an entire day a week just trying to provide updated information to the business. We were also able to show, I was also able to show how not only could we automate it, but we could deliver so much more than what they were just asking for. Over the years, we had gone from first showing applications to enrollment on a daily basis, as you see up here. This is actually applications to disenrollments, something that we added in a year after that. So it's really been a tool that we've been able to grow and change with each AEP year with, as the business gets an understanding and a handle on one metric. Like I said, applications to enrollment was an unknown item at the time. But when you hit 95 to 98% every single year, you move on and we start thinking like, well, geez, what does it look like on a daily basis when I come in here? Now, this is filled out at the end of open enrollment, but as you can imagine, day by day, as the business comes in, each marker on the 10:15 to 12:07 starts going up. If Louisiana's in the house, I heard your Medicare Advantage advertisements while I was here. So that was really exciting. I remember after the first open enrollment of this dashboard, we had screenshot images of it for every single day of what was happening, and we had ordered them in like a GIF and to the sound of Chariots of Fire, as you could just imagine enrollment growing. It was great. It was great. Should have brought it. So really what this allowed for us, what you can't see, is that there was multiple parameters that the business was able to filter down for. So if I was somebody in product who was concerned about how much dental buy-up options is my business buying, I could filter this entire dashboard and see every single demographic breakout for just that. I could also see by channel if I'm concerned about our call center or producer channel, and a whole amount of anything else that we could think of that they could filter by and be able to get this same picture, to be able to filter backwards to the last year's AEP, current, and now we're 5-6 years into AEP at current, and to be able to have that analysis and comparison. Over the years, we had added in activities like web visits, number of phone calls, how did that align on a day-by-day basis and a week-by-week basis, so that we could actually make real-time decisions on how our marketing campaigns are going and get that feedback. So it really provided a whole new language for the business and a new way that they could look at, and not only look at the information, but the way that they started to ask for insights. So as you remember, we had the questions, what does it look like? How are things turning out? Well, now because of visual analytics, it was really easy to see, oh wow, 65 to 69 is the largest age group enrolling, but it allowed and freed up our business management to be able to ask those next questions, like I wonder what the retention rate is for that group. Or I see my call center is actually performing higher than I was budgeting or anticipating, so I wonder what our call volume wait times are like, and should I be monitoring that and maybe make some changes? Or lastly, how are our members enrolling? If it's too much coming in paper, is it our producers that are bringing the paper in? So it really freed them up to be able to ask those next level questions. And having the data already structured in Tableau for the dashboard allowed us to be able to use that same data set to be able to answer those more deeper, complex questions. So Eric, it's our theme.
So this brought us to a new overall philosophy. We were going to institute widely at Premera. We're going to take data to the edge. What does that mean, and how do we break that down? We were going to provide infrastructure to allow for immediacy. This is going to take a financial commitment. It was going to require us to create trust in the information, and we're going to have to cultivate a data-centric environment. This is going to have to change some thinking, and going to have to ask folks to reimagine how they can be connected in this information stream and this information economy.
So Premera made some tangible investments. A couple years ago, we strategically and intentionally decided to invest on tools to help with our ETL processes. We implemented Attunity so that we could have near real-time streaming. Today, I am so excited with some of the new technologies coming out to be able to start shifting from day-old to near real-time dashboards and visual analytics. I mean, talk about actionable. With tools like that, that's really supported us in that journey. We also invested in our existing data warehouse on Netezza and speeding it up and making sure that it was adequate to be able to service the existing community that was using it. We went big data, brought in the Hadoop. We had all that web data and analytics that we needed to store, call data, voice mining from our call center. Okay. Lots of good stuff. And then lastly, we brought in more recently Teradata for a data lake for the analysts. So they actually had the tools to do their job. That's novel. Of course, we have Tableau, and that's been really huge, and the big investment that's really been bringing this all together for how we deliver information to the end user. And we brought in Data IQ for our data scientists, and a platform to which I'm hoping we can create a sharing environment where their models can quickly be picked up and brought into distribution tools like Tableau so that our end users can actually use them in real time.
All right, so a use case. So we've got this latency problem knocked down, and we're ready to go at it. And we got a vendor that comes in and is promising to be able to affect some high-cost chronic condition patients and really reduce their overall cost by doing some innovative person-to-person work. And so we start this dialogue where we're shipping them data on anonymized data, and they're doing some number crunching. They're saying this is what we could do. We could make some big strides, and we're able to rapidly prototype and turn around these specs or ideas on which patient populations might qualify for this program. Would we include the highest cost chronic condition folks that we already have management programs that are outreach to. But we're able to then visualize this stuff and get a picture into the leadership's hands so that they can make these decisions, and we're able to go live pretty rapidly and launch a pilot program on a well-defined population to see if we can't make healthcare work better for these folks and reduce overall costs and pain and suffering. This dialogue, visual dialogue into who would be the right target audience and how would we go forward with that was critical in making that contracting work out. So we launch into the program, and just a few months in, we're starting to compare actual costs to what we had contracted as this shared savings arrangement, and then what also, we're looking at a line about the benchmark price. Well, it looks like we're saving $76 a month. This is right out of the bat, after just a few months of run out, we're able to confidently say that the patients in this population are costing much less than what we had expected for the overall population that had been defined through our initial process. So this gets us to a place where we're able to recontract for a whole new suite of folks. Within 6 months of launch, we're already setting out to expand the population from a nominal size to a much larger population. We have a lot of confidence in the veracity of the data feeds that are happening because we've established these links and we're getting these data feeds smoothly coming into our system. And we're able to communicate exactly where that performance is happening and pinpoint it to the cost categories that are seeing the savings. Unfortunately, all of this was a lie. This was a big failure. This was a big slap in the face. No, what we had made the mistake of is when we had originally defined the population, we said, yes, we're going to put those highest cost people into the program, but that message never got communicated to the folks who were sending out the stream of contact information to the vendor. So the vendor was only managing the moderate to lower risk parts of these high cost chronic patients, not the highest of the risks. So what we saw was average costs that came in well below what we had contracted for, but really it was just their normal costs because we had left out the highest cost patients. Talk about defeat. This is the kind of gutting feeling where you're like, man, I put so much work, I thought I had done all my crossing of T's, got them right. But it's the sort of failure where you're just like, ugh, gutted.
That's all about what you learn from it, right?
That's right. And so we had to lean into our values and just go back to the drawing board. And this is kind of that philosophy part where you're like, okay, let's focus on what it is we're here to do. We're here to make healthcare work better for these folks. How can we do it?
So as I had mentioned earlier, we had made a whole bunch of tangible investments. But what does that really do for you anyway? I mean, as you guys know in healthcare, that your minds and your understanding and your subject matter experts in the topic and the fields that you guys work in is more valuable sometimes than the technical expertise that you actually have. And so as a company, us investing in tools like Teradata or Dataiku or Tableau, it really would be all for nothing if the people who really needed to implement them and utilize them didn't get the training that they needed. Early on, thankfully, we had identified that, and we've been working really hard to create training. I tell you, last year I remember at Tableau conference in Las Vegas, I came in wanting to see how do we look in comparison to other healthcare people out there. What is the healthcare community doing for Tableau? But I quickly found myself at the end of the conference last year hearing a reoccurring theme of community of practice and community of excellence. And so I walked away from that last conference and I was excited to find an internal person who was also excited about generating a community of practice, and that's been really huge for us at Premera. We also set up some templates and best practices and was really working to mature the data language of the business. I'm sure that all of us in here, we're analysts and we can go into our tools, and as Eric has mentioned, you can go in and you know what the story is, but we also have an audience out there who maybe is newer to visual analytics, and those are the people that we're trying to service. And so we've been really working on maturing that language.
Some of the things are as simple as the preferences.tps file that you have in your My Tableau repository. Building that out with the color schemes that are associated with your business and the right gradients, and shipping those out and make sure all your Tableau desktop users have access to those same palettes. Putting together a suite of in-house branded icons and getting those into everybody's shapes files so that when they're like, oh gosh, how do I represent what this looks like, or a suite of company logos, that kind of thing. And then templates where it's like, hey, how do you do that kind of a chart? I can just pull in a generic version of it and now I can just plug and play the data elements that I want to represent, and I can have that branded visual consistency with what other people are doing in the company, and I don't have to have my audience spend as much time getting up to speed on how to read this kind of a chart.
And lastly, we invested in, as a company, a data governance office. And this is something actually I have been noticing around the TC conference this year, is really organizations probably finding themselves at the same point in time that we are, where we really do need to have a centralized data custody that really does define maybe the approach, the way we identify, the way we communicate common terms.
This is our dashboard designer. And our dashboard designer starts out in a world of a large latency cycle.
Did you name her?
I haven't named her. What should we name her? We can call her Naomi.
her.
So Naomi here has a large latency cycle, and she's excited because in first blush, what happens when you improve on latency? You can get the same reporting, but faster, right?
I think Naomi looks like an Erica.
All right, Erica. But is that all there is to this idea of improving immediacy? I would submit that it's not just the same reporting, but faster. In fact, you're opening up a whole different paradigm when you get that reporting sooner. If you have the reporting within the same cycle of, let's say, there's a medical event happening, and within the time that that medical event could turn into a problem, you're able to be actionable about it. You're solving a different suite of problems. If you can get information into the eyes of somebody who's on the same call before that call is over, you're accessing a different suite of solutions that are helpful to that member. If you can solve that problem while the person is on the website, they don't even have to come back that next time. That kind of immediacy and turnaround is the sort of thing that gives us a whole new way of thinking around our solution set. When it comes to custody, we had to think about a different sort of paradigm for different layers of this. So let's imagine splitting out this custody problem into 3 parts. One is, who's the custodian of the data source itself? And that person might be responsible for saying all the numbers in the data set mean what they say they mean, and that the row levels are representative of all their indicative data elements. The dashboard owner is the one who's trying to tell this story. And so custody over the dashboard itself is a different sort of problem. And then, of course, permissions can be thought of as its own custody problem. Who's responsible for sharing and keeping locked down? Who gets to see what? These are 3 different custody problems that once we divide them, we realize we don't have to put them all on the shoulders of one person. And so we can also think of this data custody idea as a conversation, something that's happening between the custodians. If we give the data source custodian access to the visualization as it's being developed, that way they can verify and validate the components of the dashboard, and they can feel like they can stand behind the numbers that they're being representative of. And this is interesting in that one of the dashboards we'll show later, Naomi is the data source owner, and I'm the dashboard designer. And trying to keep this dialogue is a really tricky problem, especially if the data source owner is accustomed to being their own dashboard designer. But also, we're having a conversation between the subject matter experts so that we're not just getting validation from the folks who own the data, we're getting validation from the folks who know the meaning of the data, and they can affirm or disconfirm that what is being represented in any kind of story is actually what we mean to say.
Ooh, data language. Let's Tableau this discussion. Does anybody recognize that? Some of the swag we get here? I say pen wrong, so I meant this kind of a pen, not the writing one. You know, I actually really, it's one of my favorite ones and one of my favorite sayings, because I really take it to heart. You know, I remember those early days as I was showing you that Medicare Advantage dashboard, and we're talking about data language. It really opened up through Tableau and visual analytics a new way of actually engaging our customer base and really tableauing the discussion. I have to say, you know, most people out here probably recognize how, or you know, understand and are in that position where it's like you get the business who's over here who maybe submits some request, and you go out and get the data and you put it together and you say, is this kind of what you're looking for? But us as analysts, you know, that's our job, is to really think even deeper and think even further. And so nowadays with Tableau, I really can sit down with the business and we sit at a table. I'll put together a dashboard with some of the preliminary data and layout and some visualizations, and we'll actually design on the fly. And I find that that 1 hour session can, save me 3, 4, 5 days and them. And it's actually really engaging, and it's a great way to start getting the business to be able to expand the maturity and the way that they communicate and ask for things.
Now, Naomi spends a lot of time in the data exploration phase and trying to give her customers access to mass exploration techniques. But sometimes an important realization is that you've spent a lot of time in your data world, and after, say, 20 hours of monkeying with this data, you have an insight, and you're like, whoa, look, I am seeing something for the first time here. There's a relationship here that wasn't clear to me before, and you've made a discovery. So is the dashboard I'm looking at the moment that I make a discovery the same one that I should be presenting when I'm asking my users to make that discovery? If I assume that the dashboard, because it was sufficient for me to learn something, that it will be sufficient for them, then I might be making a mistake in assuming that they've spent anywhere close to the same amount of time looking at the data as I have. So instead, maybe it's correct to step back and go whiteboard it and say, okay, well, what would I need to show to make this discovery or this insight as clear as possible, and then think about allowing that drill down as a second layer.
Eric, as more of the production side dashboard developer, I have to say, I can throw together a dashboard that looks great in like 10 minutes because of Tableau. But I will tell you, it takes me 10 times longer to actually make it be correct, to make it be understood. And like the nuances of just, do I have a line here, or do I add a little bit more color here, or how do I label this, or maybe I have too much text here and too much viz over here, and maybe I need to rethink my layout. That a lot of time actually goes there to make sure that your dashboard is actually usable.
So what does taking data to the edge look like at Premera?
So we're going to introduce to you, this is the fun part. I know you guys have all been waiting. I see people looking down sometimes. Look up, everybody. This is the examples of our visual analytics at Premera. Wow, this is just a lot of filters. About a couple years ago, our knowledge management team, who does our group reporting and our Tableau reporting, they actually had a very intensive reporting package. It was over like 28, 30 pages long. They had to put it together with a combination of Excel for visuals and maybe a paginated reporting tool for others, and even PowerPoint to kind of get that package put together. It was very manual to be able to put together, but it was highly important and an asset that we delivered to our customer base. However, this past year, they took to Tableau to be able to build that, really push Tableau to the edge to get a 28-page reporting package out of it. But here, as you can see today.
So this is a page from an actual employer group report. Thank you to Tableau for being generous enough in allowing us to look into your actual performance. You'll see some, relative to benchmark, pretty low ER utilization. But I will notice that there's a year-over-year climb there. I imagine that maybe those Lime bikes where you all travel from Wallingford to Fremont, wear a helmet, people. Be safe. But I see a lot of preventable ER visits that y'all could just maybe wait a little bit and go to the regular office visit the next day. Save yourself a lot of money. We're looking at a huge cost differential. Our customer service teams are able to manage our workforce with looking at real-time sights into how is the service level, how long are people having to wait on hold to talk to a customer service rep, so we can get exactly the right amount of staffing in at any one time.
Yeah, as Eric mentioned, I throw everything and the kitchen sink into my dashboards. This is a great example of a process improvement. This was about the first rendition a little over 3 years ago of bringing together our group setup. I know process isn't really as sexy as, ER clinical matters, but, it's fundamental to our business and what we do. And here we had a group of our group setup who all had their own silos of how they do things, and they just kind of kicked the can forward and mark the task done in the core system. But nobody was really monitoring how everything was going between the different groups. And through this dashboard, we were able to bring together 4 to 5 different groups and growing that participate in the same work stream and to be able to show value of that data. Now we've actually transitioned this year into being almost near real time so that they can actually, instead of assigning people out to groups themselves and then sitting away around when they have high or low volumes coming in, to delving out work at the time that it's needed to the groups that actually need it. This increased visibility, this upped the data language of the people using it. It's increased our time or decreased the time that it took us to process, and it actually had benchmarks that management could use when they're sitting there looking at staffing or forecasting of what's coming down the pipe.
All right, clinical stuff. So hospitals have this idea of a bed board where they kind of show out of all of our rooms in the hospital which ones are occupied and what kind of things are going on there. But we had a clinical lead or our medical director come in and say, well, why don't we have a bed board? What would it look like to show the hospitals in our network and who is showing up and how many? So we're able to drill in and show a big picture thing. We're finally getting these early notification events about when people show up in the hospital. We're able to kind of drill in on the demographics of who's going where. And in the outpatient setting, we're able to think about things from a clinical perspective or a specialty perspective. So when we're thinking about network adequacy, we're visualizing this idea of where is it that people get the different types of services that the various hospital systems are providing. We're getting live notifications, so within 15 minutes, we know that you've shown up in the ER. We can alert our medical and clinical care teams so that we can help facilitate that information sharing between the maintenance caregivers, whether they be ours on staff or the PCPs or whomever we have in our directories, and the folks that show up in the ER so that we can avoid those kind of like medical like medication interference situations or over-imaging where someone had their MRI and they are needing to just get that MRI into the view of the doctors.
All right, so back to the kitchen sink. This was actually a really fun dashboard to work on, as it really reminds me about the story of custody and really about understanding that, your story and my story can both be true but output different information. So as this is to do, it was to leverage our registration population on our web. And the company wanted to drive our utilization of members signing up on the web, but more specifically signing up for paperless. So they came up with a goal of what percentage of our population. However, as our website goes, and many of you might know, you can be registered, but maybe not even be a current eligible member. So if I was the web administrator, it would be true for me to say that I have X number of registered people, and I had this amount of usage. But however, as the business who actually wants to make change in the population that we can impact, that would be a different denominator. So through this exercise, we were able to come up with a common definition, a common language on what it meant for the population that we could actually impact, that is our members, that can register for us, and kind of get a baseline. In addition to that, on the lower half there, we had started out some marketing campaigns. So when our members were new, we were sending out emails automatically. And at the time, we were also setting them to paperless on having them elect to go not paperless rather than the opposite. So we were able to also provide insight to how our marketing campaigns were performing. So that allowed us to get an ROI benchmark and tracking performance. Thank you, Eric. It's okay. Don't worry about it.
All right. We're taking a look here. These are some mock-up performance levels, but what we're looking at is our enterprise performance dashboard, how it is that our overall company is performing against the corporate goals that we've set out for ourselves. We're sourcing data from many different corners of the business where the separate data source owners are affirming that that data is representative of what they mean for it. We allow the drill down so that any user can dive in and see what components and what parts of what they work on contribute to the performance on those goals, where the successes and the failures are. And collectively, we have a new sharing idea where the folks from one corner of the business are able to see how other corners of the business are interacting, or how their work on the problem of, let's say, member satisfaction might be associated with our successes or failures when it comes to membership.
So we have a new frontier.
Yeah, we do.
We love quotes.
So what does it mean next? How do we take this forward? And what do we learn when it comes to the lessons from our key paradigms here?
Well, as Eric, you shared with everybody that, you know what, sometimes immediacy can have large consequences.
It's true.
But again, it goes back to that quote from Paul Allen. It's really what we do with it.
Fail forward fast.
Yes, thank you. Hoarding knowledge, you know, it is the enemy of understanding. Transparency is everything, and I'm sure that's what everybody here knows as we're data analytics specialists. So, and I think too, lastly, the lesson that we really want you guys to understand and had gathered from here is that sometimes the audience that you're working with, they might not be ready for what you're showing them. And that really, it is our responsibility as stewards of visual analytics to try to elevate their understanding and bring them along with us.
Well, to paraphrase Adam Grant, you know, it's repetition. Like sometimes you have to socialize that idea several times before it really turns into something that someone can absorb. All right, so back to our efficiency frontier on the concept of latency. We can, you know, through our investments, we can kind of look at this as the next level. We can achieve immediacy without sacrificing accuracy. In the context of data custody, if we think of this as a cyclical conversation, that you can have participatory involvement and you can assure that everybody feels like they have ownership of what's being reported. These subject matter experts are working in concert with the developers and the data engineers, and we feel like we have that veracity problem kind of kicked. And of course, why not? You can have both data and insights. With interactivity, you can go from having top-level communicative understanding, and of course, don't forget, Tableau this discussion.
So, you know, we've been spending this time with you guys explaining our journey that we've been on over the last 5 years. And so what we really wanted to show you was how did that really look? We didn't just jump in to Tableau and have widespread adoption. It was really only a handful of us at that first COP meeting about 5 years ago. You remember that?
I do.
It was, as far as Tableau developers, a small group of us who were in the position and took advantage of it. But over the years, we had put out a lot of visual analytics for our users and started to mature that language. As you can see here, the active server users that we had grown, as well as the desktop licenses. But I think you hit a point here, didn't you?
Yeah, so we had a physical server, but it was kind of limited. And toward the end of this time period, Naomi had bogged up the server so badly with
every day
just
I
gobbled
have to
it up.
refresh.
It made all my reporting like take forever for it to render, and it was like almost useless. So I was ready to just turn my back and give up on Tableau. But fortunately, we made it to the next stage. So we switched out, we upgraded to the supersized server. We were able to get lots more parts of the business involved, and we're getting rapid response when it comes to our visualization rendering and utility.
I'm looking forward to what's next.
Well, aren't we all? So actually, just this past weekend, we finally made that 2018.1 upgrade. We're expanding our licenses. This new arrangement is going to allow us to go enterprise-wide. So we're going to get everybody in the business a view into the dashboards that people can roll out. And that's going to allow us to embed dashboards in our intranet sites so that you can build a widget or something that's relevant to your department and share it with anybody in the company that lands on your internal splash page.
I know for me, I'm excited to not have to manage so many permissions in and out all the time.
Yeah, we still maintain like separate sites for our stuff that needs that really tight permissions control and that protected information. But so many parts of the business don't require having all protected information being shared out in order to say something smart about how successes and failures are relative to where we want to be.
So what is that? You know, we're here, we're talking about visual analytics and how we got here. So what does the Tableau model look like at Premera? Well, as Eric just mentioned, it's server access for everybody in our company. I think more importantly, what has been exciting to see is that we've been offering all the business users who are analysts who need desktop to be able to get that. I mean, that is a novel idea, to be able to push that out to people who sometimes maybe aren't even SQL developers and are using Excel. That's taking data to the edge for us. We have crowdsourced our permissions and curated data sets so that, can you imagine a day where you have a curated data set of say, per member per month with some demographic information that everybody's used to? And maybe the business user who doesn't have Tableau desktop actually goes in and asks their own ad hoc question of the data set and publishes that out to somebody else. So what does the future look like at Premera for taking data to the edge? This is where I think I am the most excited. I was so juiced up after Devs on Stage. I think last year at Tableau conference in Las Vegas, I had learned about Tableau extensions, and this year I was actually able to see it in action. I shared with you some of those process-based applications that I deal with, and what capability I am most looking forward to when I return is to include extensions with write-back activity. So no longer do my people have to come in, wait a day to get the information to see, had what I had entered, had it made it through, did it look right? I have to go to this system to enter it and that system to look at it, that they could do it all in one. I'm excited for that day. I'm excited also for mobile. As I mentioned last year, COP was something new to me that I hadn't realized I was gonna go down that track. Well, this year I landed in a mobile session on accident, and I have to say I'm really excited to see what we can do with that technology, even just internally for our employers, but maybe even with our members.
So we're reaffirming our commitment to deliver data to the people who need it, when they need it, in a way that they can digest it, and in a way that's relevant to the work that they need to do, and not more or less, and giving them the flexibility of having that control, all in service of our ultimate goal.
Make healthcare work better. So Andy, actually,
yeah, thank you, Andy.
Can you have some things to take away with you? Yeah. I think these are good points, right?
Yeah. That's right.
It is actually, right. So that really, as we talked about, data immediacy is really worth investing in. As you saw with our hardware and software investments, but also our people investments is core. That data custody that, we can, I like that saying, I didn't see that, divide and conquer. That's gonna be my motto for 2019, divide and conquer. And that custody can be a conversation. Why don't you take us out?
All righty. Well, thank you all for coming. We appreciate it. Hopefully our synopsized wisdom of the years of experience with this challenge has been useful.
Hey, we have 3 minutes for questions. Yes.
I love the collaborative storytelling, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Didn't rehearsed at all. It was very natural.
Well, Andy, we have been working on this for months now.
So kudos to them and a round of applause for that. And really well done.
Oh, thank you.
Hi, my name is Luke. I represent West Michigan Health Plan as well. It sounds like we might have a similar infrastructure setup. My question could be really, you could probably provide another session about this answer that I'm looking for.
Andy?
But in short, a lot of impressive stuff. I guess my question is around interest on the ingestion of data so quickly, and also it seems that you have some sort of external deployment to your employer groups and potentially maybe to your providers. I'm more interested in maybe how the infrastructure is set up so that you can have such real-time data in and out.
Well, I think from the data in, we have been, like I said, with the investments, we do have a data team that actually, our data warehouse team, but they also work with us analysts. And so really making those investments in the data lakes and like tools like Attunity, which actually can stream the information, and having in concert data engineers that we can go work with to be able to implement the things that we know we need to deliver.
I think it's
the
also
firewall.
the state's, it's participation and cooperation within the geographic regions that allow for those data exchanges. I can't say that I'm super familiar with exactly what makes it work in the various states that it does work in, but it certainly is fantastic when there's sources of kind of aggregating of those data streams so that early notifications, from a hospital's perspective, they don't want to have a different notification for each payer, of course. They want a system that they can just push out, set it and forget it kind
And
of
so
thing.
where are we sitting on the distribution to our external partners? Because that's really
as
what's
far as external, like
taking data to the edge.
the employer group report we showed here, ends up being a PDF that gets emailed.
At this point, yeah.
And there are other tools that get pushed out, but we're not using Tableau for anything external facing
Yet.
other than those PDFs that get printed out.
Yeah. But we hope to one day.
A lot of our customers actually maintain 2 separate instances
Yeah.
of Tableau Server, and that's
One on one
yeah.
side of the firewall and the other. Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, you have a question.
Well, actually, that's a really wonderful question. So the knowledge management one for the group report, that's the PDF out. Well, like I said, that they really were pushing Tableau in a way Tableau was not meant to be built. So it was 28 dashboards, or AKA 28 tabs that comprised that workbook, and it was running pretty slow. They had realized, because they had actually in the billions of data record rows, that moving their backend source to Teradata helped to speed that up. But I had a conversation with them, and I said, hey, you know what? You could use tab command and very simply just programmatically do it through tab command and generate that. So once a month when the data is available, have tab command go through, and at least for the most highly utilized group reports, generate that. And then the tool for the end user could say, hey, do I want the one that's already been generated and just take that PDF, or do I need to set some different parameters so that I can do a little bit more analysis? But yeah, very excited about programming. The tab command capability, I think, is excellent. Anything is possible with the programming side.
There was a question.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Last question.
Yeah. So I noticed you were using Data Eco, and one of the things you were talking about is having your data scientists create those models and distribute them.
Yeah.
Have you looked at any other similar AI or machine learning or deep learning tools?
So I'm not on the data.
Yes.
You have, I'm sure you are.
Yeah,
on the
there was
feedback.
definitely a big shopping process, and we have some Kaggle competitors that are really into the tools that they use, and so bringing in Data IQ is really to solve not just for the highest, expertise data scientists, but to sort of expand the data science needs to a broader set. I don't know the full story of how we ended up with
Yeah.
Data IQ as being the vendor we went with for that kind of like mid-level data science access.
And it's actually a very
writ large.
new implementation at Premera just this year. However, I do see it as a really great environment, at least, that could bring in the analysts who could take advantage of the automation server, because I like to take advantage of technology
Right,
and the way it's not
scheduled
meant to be
refreshes.
used. And but it brings you in the same environment as the data scientist. So I guess my thought would be that if I'm an analyst and I'm there and I'm getting something out of the tool, that I'm also in that same environment as the data scientist. So hopefully one day we can then just start taking in their models and delivering them right back out, particularly using the automation portion of it.
Awesome. We are out of time. Huge round of applause to Naomi
Thank you
and
guys
Eric.
for coming.
For
We
great
appreciate
storytelling.
it.